homeschool colleagues. Welcome back for another lesson of Foundations of Biblical Homeschooling. Today we are going to talk about social studies and science, or science and social studies. So if you turn with me to the course handbook and follow along as I read. All right, so we're going to be getting into science today. Now, when I was homeschooling, I did not like to teach science. I did not like to learn science, but there were little things here and there that got me interested. And one of them was that my daughter actually became a science major in college. So go figure. That's all to say that even if you try to pass on a certain type of subject, your love for a subject to your kids, or even anything onto your kids, they're going to be their own individual self. And it really doesn't matter if you can't teach a subject because your children just might have a natural interest for it. So, science was one of those for me. But through the years, as I continued to teach my children and other people's children, I found science to be interesting because I organized it in a way in my mind where it made sense and it was more fulfilling for me and meaningful. So that's what I hope to pass on to you. And we're going to go ahead and talk about the biblical principles of science because anytime we teach a subject, we want to introduce the subject, even if it's the beginning of a unit or the beginning of the year or even twice a year. We always want to integrate biblical principles. So here are some guiding principles for you to learn to better understand the subject from a biblical worldview. Follow along as I read. Teaching biblical principles does not mean adding Bible verses to subjects. And this is such a key idea because when I say biblical principles in every subject or biblical homeschooling per se, I'm not just talking about Bible verses of subjects. I'm talking about the whole way the course is organized and deciding what subjects you teach and how you teach those subjects is all coming from a biblical perspective. So, teaching by biblical principles is showing how God's truth governs the content of every subject. When we think about how science is taught with biblical principles, we must know the guiding principles of what God would teach if He were the science teacher. And that's really where our thinking begins. What would Jesus do, or what would God do as the creator of the universe trying to teach us about science? What did God do when he was with Adam and told him to name all the animals? I can only imagine what that was like. He might have described to them the different details of what he had created. He might have taught how things work. It was probably a really fascinating time. I probably would have loved science if God were my teacher. Probably all of us. But anyway, so what does he want us to know? That's the focus. If you were to ask yourself, what does the Bible say about science? We would have to start with what is science exactly? What are we talking about? Well, using Webster's 1828 dictionary says that the word science comes from the Latin word scientia, which means to know. The definition is this. Number one, in a general sense, knowledge or certain knowledge, the comprehension or understanding of truth or facts by the mind. And that's a fascinating part of the definition. The science of God must be perfect. This is literally from Webster's 1828 dictionary. He's expounding on that definition and including how the science of God must be perfect. Number two definition in philosophy, a collection of the general principles or leading truths related to any subject. And there you have it. That's the definition of science. So, if science is in essence knowledge, that's what science is, just knowledge, then there are so many subjects that we could teach in science. Now, as it relates to school subjects, in science, we might think of life science, physical science, earth science. I know that's what I was taught when I was going to college to be a teacher, when I was taking the class on how to teach science. We created this big, huge notebook on life science, physical science, and earth science lesson plans. However, we certainly didn't talk about the biblical perspective of science in terms of how would God want us to teach it. So from God's perspective, science is everything he created. I would add that the word knowledge, coupled with everything that God created, that's what science is. The knowledge of everything God created. Pretty simple here. Easy to follow. So when we think about science as the knowledge of all the things God created, we could always start with creation itself. And in creation, we learn the knowledge of a lot of different subjects: physics, chemistry, astronomy, geology, meteorology, oceanography, biology, botany, zoology. I could even put in there ornithology, which is the study of birds, which I probably should have put in there. So I think I might put that in there. Voila. I added ornithology to my list. Yeah, so ornithology is the study of birds, botany, the study of plants or flowers, and zoology, the study of animals. And of course, human anatomy and physiology, the study of our bodies. So each one of these subjects has its own set of principles, but I'd like to introduce to you the basic guiding principles of teaching science. That's where we're going to begin, as I've been doing in all the other lessons about reading, language arts, and math. This is the same. So principle number one, science is the study of the works of God in creation. And you can see how I came up with that based on the definition and relating it to creation. So as creator God, he created a world that reveals who he is, his existence on earth, and how he works. This is so beautiful. This is what makes teaching science from a biblical perspective perfect for what we want to do in our children, which is basically build in them a biblical worldview. And Romans 1:19 and 20 talks about how his attributes are clearly seen in creation. When we study science in light of this, we should always point the lesson toward God and his nature and character. Identifying qualities and character traits of God in everything you study is a good way to emphasize God as the creator. Now let's talk about principle number two. The laws of science are discoverable, but there's a caveat here. We as humans are limited in our discovery of the laws of science because those laws are infinite. We could study the rest of our lives and for all of human history and never understand all of them. But the laws of science are discoverable. So God gave us the ability to discover them if we do search them out. God commanded that we subdue the earth and have dominion over it. At creation, that's what he did. And Genesis 1:28 explains that. There is so much to learn in science. So therefore, the goal is not to understand everything, but to see the laws as they operate within a specific topic in science. So when you're studying something specific and narrow, like the daisy or the butterfly, you're going to understand how God designed that and discover the laws that work within it. When we don't understand something, there might be more to it, and we might be tempted to spend hours and hours on something, but that's not the point. The joy should be in the discovery. And that's the main thing I want to highlight here in this principle. Because when God reveals more knowledge to us, it increases our ability to take dominion of the earth. Now let's move on to principle number three. God's order and design are revealed through the study of science. Patterns can be found all throughout nature. Psalm 19:1 talks about the heavens declaring the glory of God. Finding patterns is an opportunity to glorify God and understand how He created the universe. That is also part of the discovery of studying science. Finding these patterns should be an enjoyable effort in appreciating all the details God put there for our learning and enjoyment. So, really, when you're teaching science, it's not about memorizing all the bones, although that would be fun, or memorizing the parts of a plant, although that is also fun, but it's about appreciating the process of discovery, because what that does is it reveals God's design. So if a child can identify the design of a butterfly or the design of something they're studying in nature, then they've reached the goal of learning science. And if you're able to help guide them through that discovery, then you've done your job as the teacher of science. Principle number 4. The purpose for the study of science is to be good stewards of God's creation. So if you're wondering what's the whole point of studying science if I don't need to know all these facts and figures and it's just pointing me to God or pointing my children to God, then think about it this way. The more we learn about science, the more we can use it to take care of nature around us. You see, God gave us the responsibility to take care of the earth because it is our home, and we can use it for our own benefit and for His glory to serve others. Genesis 2:15 and Psalm 8:6 through 8 talk about how we can take dominion and subdue the earth. I don't know if you guys know Matthew Murray, but he was a Navy man in the 1800s who discovered the paths of the seas based on Psalm 8. That Bible verse says that there are paths in the sea, but in 1800, we did not know what those paths were. And Matthew Murray spent his entire lifetime mapping the oceans and figuring out exactly what those paths are. And even today, seamen use those paths to get where they need to go the fastest way possible. So we're using our knowledge of science to make our lives better and to make the lives of other people better. So remind your children that the knowledge they gain in science can be used to steward or take care of the earth and ourselves. The more we know, the more we can serve others, which leads me to another person in history that you can learn about, and that is George Washington Carver. They call him the peanut guy. He's the one who learned how to grow peanuts in his particular area, and he used peanuts to create hundreds of different products, including cosmetics. It's an amazing story if you haven't read it already. So I encourage you in your study of science, bring in those science biographies and teach your children through story. That's another fun way to learn about science. Let's move on to principle number 5. The study of science is best learned through exploration, observation, and examination of things in our world. The more we document what we see, the more we will understand its laws. And that's the key here, is that we're not just reading about science, but we're documenting what we're learning. Job 38 and 39 is a story of how God was speaking directly to Job, point after point after point after point, about all the things in the world that operate the way that they do. And God wanted to know where Job was when he was doing all of that. Of course, Job wasn't there. And it's a rhetorical question that God was asking. But the point is that there were so many things in nature and in the world that we can learn about. And God made it very clear that there's a lot to learn through just observing and exploring and examining what is out there. Our world offers endless details I'm not a detail person, but when I get into the details of a specific science content, it becomes meaningful and fascinating to study those details. Now, do I remember any of those details? No, that doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent time exploring what those details are and thinking about God's nature and how he works and tying that all together. There is something of interest in science for everyone. I know a certain brain surgeon who's still alive today. Ben Carson is his name. And the subject he loved in science wasn't necessarily the human body. If you read his biography, his love was of rocks, and he could tell you everything you wanted to know about rocks. So the key here is to find what draws your attention and pursue it. Discover and examine and explore those details. Learn how you can use that information to serve other people and point it back to God, his order and design in everything. So that's it for teaching science and the biblical principles of teaching science. In the next video, we'll be talking about the biblical principles of teaching social studies.